The end is really nigh in 28 Days Later, British horror movie which came out in 2002, which was directed by Danny Boyle and rejuvenated the zombie genre. After waking up dazed and confused in an abandoned hospital, Jim, played by Cillian Murphy, wanders around London to find the whole city is deserted, where he soon discovers that a terrifying outbreak has occurred, which has left those who were infected by the disease as terrifying, bloodthirsty, primitive creatures fueled with rage who are both highly contagious and hell-bent on attacking those who aren't infected. Jim teams up with a small group of other co-survivors, including Selena, played by Naomi Harris, where they seek refuge at an army base. But during a time of a terrifying infection, could their fellow non-infected humans still be the most deadliest enemy of them all? In this scary and gritty horror classic. So today we are going to look into 10 things that you didn't know about 28 Days Later. I've actually wanted to do this video for a long time. I think I've wanted to do it for about a year now. But after my Outbreak video, it got some people pretty angry for doing such a video because of what's going on in the world at the moment. I even had one person threaten to beat me up. So naturally I thought, okay, better not do 28 Days Later anytime soon. But I then grew a pair of Wilsons and thought, what the hell, I'll go and do it anyway. So let's check it out. Number 10. 28 Days Later wouldn't exist without the beach. In the year 2000, director Danny Boyle and frequent collaborating producer Andrew McDonald made the psychological paradise thriller The Beach, which starred Leonardo DiCaprio. Although Boyle and McDonald had previously had great success with movies like Shallow Grave and Trainspotting, The Beach had something of a lukewarm reception, with it not really hitting off with audiences and critics. And even Danny Boyle himself said that while filming The Beach, he felt that it was not going to be a good movie as all the characters were pretty unlikable. The Beach, of course, was based on a novel by English author Alex Garland, and despite its mixed reception, The Beach still made money, and thus Garland approached McDonald about the possibility of teaming up to make a movie featuring running zombies. Garland was a fan of zombies and went off to write a script, with McDonald contributing to the script here and there. And his influences was Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead, and the Resident Evil video games, as well as the Day of the Triffids. I actually really liked The Beach, despite some of its justified criticisms, and plan to do an episode on it sometime in the future. Number 9. Modernizing Zombies. Although zombies are now mainstream and it seems that people just can't get enough of zombies, creating its own celebrated subculture, during the 90s and early 2000s the zombie craze in movies had somewhat fizzled out and wasn't so prominent in the collective mainstream zeitgeist. So 28 Days Later was an opportunity to breathe new life into the genre. The word zombie is never actually spoken throughout the movie, nor are the zombie creatures undead, so no rising from the grave in this film. But instead they are called the infected, with the zombies being created by a virus outbreak created in a lab called Rage, which was intended to suppress human violence but obviously caused the opposite. Also, 28 Days Later often holds the honor of being the first movie to show running zombies, but that honor actually belongs to the 1985 horror comedy Return of the Living Dead. Number 8. Making London Deserted. The movie starts off with scenes of a confused Jim wandering around an empty, deserted London. This left many viewers wondering just how on earth were these scenes filmed, especially considering that London is one of the most busiest cities in the world, along with these shots also featuring otherwise bustling locations like Piccadilly Circus and Westminster Bridge. Well, the filming was done by closing the streets off for brief periods of time, really early in the morning, usually at about 5 AM, and it was shot during the summer so there would be more light. Often streets would be closed off with the crew just giving themselves 45 minutes to get the shots that they wanted. One scene saw a bus on its side, and yes, to film that, the crew actually had to get a bus on its side like that, and then quickly lift it back up again within a quick time span. but the efforts were worth it just to get that one haunting shot. There are scenes throughout the movie of our main characters walking around a deserted London, of which often while filming cars could be seen in the background, so to accommodate this the cars were painted out in the picture during post. Number 7. The movie's villain nearly had a different face. 28 Days Later starred actors who were mainly unknown at the time. Cillian Murphy starred in a few movies that weren't really mainstream, and Naomi Harris was a former British child star. In fact, I think I remember seeing her in the British children's show Simon and the Witch. Both Murphy and Harris, as we all know, would go on to become huge movie stars. The role of the young girl Hannah was played by Megan Burns, whom has since become a gothic pop rock singer, and has changed her public name to Betty Curse. The anxious scientist that we see at the start of the movie was played by David Schneider, who Mr. Bean fans will remember as the judo instructor who Mr. Bean gets the upper hand on in that episode where Mr. Bean goes to school. The only two well-known faces in the movie of that time were Irish actor Braden Gleeson, who played the ill-fated Frank. Gleeson previously starred in Braveheart and would go on to star in many other movies, and the other well-known face was Christopher Eccleston, who played the sinister Major Henry West. Eccleston previously starred in Gone in 60 Seconds, and would go on to wow everyone with his portrayal of the Ninth Doctor in the revived series of Doctor Who just a few years later. However, Eccleston supposedly wasn't originally intended to play West, but director Danny Boyle originally had Scottish actor Robert Carlyle in mind for the role, who previously worked with Boyle on Trainspotting and The Beach. However, Carlyle was unavailable at the time of filming, so Eccleston it was. Eccleston had also previously worked with Boyle on Shallow Grave, which, by the way, if you haven't seen Shallow Grave, I highly recommend it. It's a great Scottish horror movie. However, Carlyle would go on to star in the sequel 28 Weeks Later, so he did make it into the movie's universe after all. I also saw a few online claims that Ewan McGregor was going to play Jim, but he had a falling out with Danny Boyle after not being cast in The Beach, with Leonardo DiCaprio being cast instead. But going by the timeline of things, I don't know, just take with that what you will. Number 6. Some of the music for 28 Days Later would be reused in another movie. The music of 28 Days Later was composed by Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch composer John Murphy, and his score is insanely haunting. His guitar strings in 28 Days Later always gives me shivers up my spine. It often sounds tragic, but also has moments of modern rock in it as well. The most memorable track he made for the movie is a piece called In the House in a Heartbeat, and is often considered as 28 Days Later's main theme. However, several years later I was watching the superhero movie Kick-Ass, where I heard something that sounded a little familiar. Yep, it was none other than the music tunes of In the House in a Heartbeat, which was reused for the superhero flick, only it was used for the scenes involving the Big Daddy character, which was played by Nicolas Cage. Murphy is credited as being one of 4 composers for Kick-Ass. I don't know if that's because it used his song or if he generally did contribute to that movie, but I guess someone on the production of Kick-Ass loved his music for 28 Days Later and wanted to recycle it. To me, it's really strange watching Kick-Ass and hearing the 28 Days Later music, as that particular theme always makes me think about deserted London and bloodthirsty zombies. It doesn't really make me think of Nicolas Cage dressed up as Batman, but hey, once again, that's just me. Number 5. Filming in sequence. 28 Days Later is one of those rare occasions where a movie was filmed in chronological order. Director Danny Boyle claims that this helped the actors with developing their characters, and I think it helps with exploring the character's journey within the film. The movie's budget was quite tight, only consisting of £8 million, which amounts to nearly $10 million US. Boyle knew that most of the movie's budget would have to go to special effects in order to compete with big budget blockbusters that came out of Hollywood. In fact, for the scene where Jim enters the chapel, supposedly all the extras who played the infected were only paid in having a cup of tea for their efforts. In addition to that, in the scene where Jim wakes up in the hospital at the start of the movie, it was intended to have the hospital covered in corpses, but it was decided that it would be more haunting just to show the hospital empty, which admittedly adds more mystery and is more disorientating. That and it probably would have saved the crew from making even more cups of tea. Number 4. Movie posters. Oh yes, it's that part of the episode where we dive into movie posters. When I first saw this poster, there were two things that stood out to me. One, this poster is really red. It's so red it kind of screams at you just how red it is. And two, the Biohazard Waste logo, which suggests that this film is going to be about blood and disease. Despite the fact that the Biohazard logo is now heavily associated with zombies thanks to this poster, for its time there was nothing to suggest that this is a zombie movie, but it still looks very haunting and intriguing. It also features a black silhouette illustration of the Jim character walking through London. It kind of has a street art graffiti feel about it. There is another version of this poster which had looming infected eyes above the illustration. This one kind of lets you know straight away that there will be zombies, or at least threatening infected people. I like it even though it's not as subtle. Then there is this Japanese poster, which features a photo of Cillian Murphy walking through a deserted London with a pink glow in the sky, sort of making it look more like a dramatic movie as opposed to a horror. It's a great photo, don't get me wrong, but to me it doesn't scream horror like the other posters do. It also had this weird label on it featuring the movie's title, which is interesting. When the movie was released on DVD here in Australia, we got this cover, which is kind of similar, only it uses different zombie eyes. These eyes look more angry and aggressive, and the black graffiti illustration is replaced with an image from the movie, of Jim running from the zombies, only it's blended into the poster. I actually really like this one too. Number 3, comic book. In 2007, there was a 4-part graphic novel series based on 28 Days Later, called 28 Days Later, The Aftermath. The books were released by Fox Atom Comics, and they were designed to bridge the gap between 28 Days Later and its sequel 28 Weeks Later. And in the book, we learn more about the virus and how it was created and the events which led to London to be ravaged by it. The story doesn't follow Jim or Selena or any of the other characters seen in 28 Weeks Later, but another family who get caught up in the outbreak while on a family picnic. What I love is how this story extends the mythology seen in 28 Days Later and builds on that world, answering many questions that the movie didn't answer. Then from 2009 to 2011, another comic book series was published based on 28 Days Later, only this time the comic was released by Boom Studios. And like 28 Days Later Aftermath, it extends on the events between the two 28 Days movies. The release consisted of 24 issues, and even sees the return of the Selena character. The comics are beautifully illustrated with artwork that perfectly recaptures the look and feel of the movie, and I recommend it to all fans of this movie series. Number 2, alternative ending. Despite how grisly 28 Days Later can be, it has something of a happy, upbeat ending, where after getting shot at the army base, we learn that some time has passed and that Jim is alive and well, and that he and Selena and Hannah now take residence in a cottage along a coast, and that they frequently see army jets flying around, suggesting hope and that life will get back to normal soon. However, in an alternative ending, we see Selena and Hannah desperately try to save Jim in a rundown hospital, where the character succumbs to his injuries and dies. And in another bizarre deleted scene, Jim is now a chicken. Okay, the character hasn't turned into a chicken, but rather a chicken takes his place, so his name can live on, I guess. Maybe I'm a sucker for happy endings, but I'm glad that Jim survived after all, because throughout the movie we followed him and seen his character grow, so it's more rewarding and satisfying to see his character survive the ordeal. But I understand that if some viewers feel that the ending would have carried more weight and been more impactful had he died. As I've said many times, it depends on the eye of the viewer. Number 1, a small movie that went a long way. 28 Days Later had a moderate success in the box office, especially considering its small budget, as it made over $82 million. The movie got great praise from both audience and critics alike. It got praise for its haunting atmosphere, performances, music, and for giving us zombies that run, despite, once again, Return of the Living Dead already doing that. And from there, the zombie genre was here to stay, with many subsequent zombie-related movies being released in 28 Days Later's aftermath. I can remember reading a review at the time in a movie magazine, which said that 28 Days Later undoes a lot of the damage to modern British films that the Bond film Die Another Day had caused, in which both movies came out in 2002. Now, take what you want with that review. And like other Boyle movies like Trainspotting and Slumdog Millionaire, the popularity has continued to grow with 28 Days Later, and become even more appreciated with the passing of time, of which a sequel came out several years later, but that's a story for another episode. 28 Days Later is a terrifying and exciting movie that leaves you on the edge of your seat and makes the zombie outbreak seem realistic, as it creates a what-if alternative reality and gets the audience to live out that terror and desperation. And so, nearly 20 years later, the world has never really recovered from this highly infectious movie. I highly recommend this movie, especially if you're a horror fan, and it's particularly something of a must if you're a zombie fan. Not only for its horror, but the movie also does pose many interesting philosophical questions, particularly about normality and the order of things. But hey, before I sound too much like a pompous movie squire, or is that square, I'm going to wrap this up. So I'm Minty, and I'll see you in 28 Days Later. Well, not really, you'll see me much sooner than that, but I just thought that would sound cool for the outro. See ya!